Ronald Rules Lawyer, I was in the middle of a long rest, recovering from the flurry of videos I made for the Pathfinder 2e remaster that has dropped today. But I had to wake up from my coffin in order to cover the breaking news of a day one errata, and also guidelines to make the current books compatible with the new remaster, which I call 2.1, an incremental new edition. I'm doing this 1 hour after the news dropped, so if you want breaking news, not only like, subscribe to my channel, but also ring the bell and you'll get notified as soon as my next video drops. But yeah, I did a quick review using my rules lawyer eyes. I am an actual lawyer, and also I have a good grasp of what the Pathfinder 2e rules are and what a lot of the current discussions and controversies that are raging are in the Pathfinder 2e community right now. I'm going to hit the highlights, and yes, the death and dying rules have been revised to match how the majority of players and GMs have been running it at their tables. But also, we see a buff to the champions from the core rulebook. So I'm going to walk through the changes and say what I think of them. So here's Paizo's blog post that links us to their FAQ and errata page. So we have day one errata of the player core. Now, I expect some people to complain that there is the need for errata on day one. And also, it's not a small amount of errata. I would just say two things. The Pathfinder core rulebook had an extensive public playtest and dropped in 2019. And even after all of that development time, there was the need to have some crucial errata within a couple of weeks of release. Preventing death with hero points in one part of the book used to make you conscious again, and wizards used to have another first level class feat. Those and other significant things were in error in the core rulebook. Also, the remaster had a very small turnaround time. Paizo made the decision in January to go forward with an incremental new edition that would be published under an independent license, independent from the OGL. And while I don't have personal experience working on large rulebooks, I can only imagine the logistical nightmare of coordinating a large staff. Some of them are making changes and fixes here or there that affect what everyone else is working on, how to get all of that coordinated, and also doing layout, etc., etc. So I think given the state of things and the fact that people would be complaining who would be getting the Pathfinder core rulebook this year for a period of time before the remaster books hit the street and complain that those are being made obsolete, they wanted to get these books out as soon as possible and free themselves from the OGL. So I don't direct any criticism to them for how they went about it. And I'm glad we got this errata as early as we did. Okay, there's a lot of things here, but I'm only going to hit the things that jumped out at me. First, the clear editing error, making the fighter's aggressive block require an additional reaction in addition to shield block. That's been reversed. It's a free action like before. Grim Tendrils was added to the Divine list, and I pointed that out in my videos and said that was a good change. I thought that a spell that did void damage to living creatures obviously should be in the Divine list, but apparently Paizo doesn't think so. Our quartet of reorganized restoration spells in the remaster did not give casters a way to counter the slowed condition. They said that that was an oversight. The 3 spells that deal with conditions and not afflictions now have slowed added to them when they are heightened to 4th rank. Which tells me that because the stunned condition can be countered by these spells at 8th rank, that stunned is distinct from slowed. It doesn't simply tax your actions at the start of your turn. It additionally means you do not act. So that's another piece of evidence, another exhibit for the rules lawyer's case. The Figment cantrip, which is a buff of ghost sound, which lets you make visual illusions as well as sound ones, was mistakenly not given the subtle trait. And I actually, in one of my videos, said you still had to make noise and have visual manifestations when you did these. Well, apparently it was an oversight. So this is quite a powerful spell, given that it's a cantrip. So apparently you can, without saying a word and without anything visual happening, you still have to do some gestures, make illusions appear, or illusory sounds. So that's a pretty powerful cantrip. The Tempest Surge Druid focus spell, which I highlighted as strong in my Druid video, they said it did too much. So they have removed the persistent electricity damage. That is a nerf compared to the current Tempest Surge. And if you're in Pathfinder Society official organized play, since this is the same name, this now supersedes the previous version. However, it is a strong focus spell, and for me, the main part of the spell, I think, in addition to the damage, was making a creature clumsy too. That's still there. Now, the big one, they say that the way most tables have been running the wounded condition is the official rule. They say that in the recovery checks section, wherever it said in parentheses, add your wounded condition to your dying value when you fail a recovery check, remove that language. And also where it said under taking damage, to remember to add the value of your wounded condition to your dying value, they say delete that sentence. So now it is consistent with the definitions of dying and wounded in the back part of the book. Now, my position all along has been that the Paizo staff were not of one mind. You can see my video on that in my 10 Things I Dislike video. They actually moved in opposite directions in different parts of the book, and the text in the remaster had contradictory language in 2 different sections. In fact, this language that said that when you take damage and increase your dying value to remember to add your wounded condition, that completely contradicted what was said under the dying condition in the back of the book. It just said increase it by 2 if you take damage from a critical hit or a critical failure on a saving throw. I'll show on the screen the 2 versions that are currently in the book. So this makes them consistent with each other. However, I do believe Mark Seifter, when I was a guest on their Roll for Combat stream, that the designers were of one mind and thought that the more brutal version of the rule should be the rule. And apparently, the language that made it less brutal was a zealous editor. Well, I would like to thank that person for making a mistake. Or maybe surreptitiously putting in a what they believed should be how the rule operated when they did their editing, because that has established a norm and expectation in the community that I think has helped make the game less brutal than what people probably want. Now, I think this final language is better than the more brutal version, and I'll say why at the very end. We have errata for the GM core book. Nothing jumped out to me as something to highlight compared to what we're about to see. We also get errata for currently published books, including the core rulebook on how to make content there, including the classes that don't appear in the remaster, compatible with the remaster. So we get a big section on the champion class, and I think this is buffing the class. This obviously is probably going to be a preview of what we'll see in Player Core 2 with the remastered champion. These changes were obviously necessary because alignment is being removed in the remaster. You can't really just plop in the current champion in a campaign that's going under the remaster rules. It's interesting, they still countenance champions having an alignment, but it says that the tenets of your champion's code become more important than your alignment, and that you can lose your abilities only if you violate champion-related anathema. Okay, there's a little confusion here. It says, use the sanctification options listed for the gods presented in Player Core. For many gods, sanctifying is optional. Now, interestingly enough, it would seem that this precludes followers of some deities from being able to be a champion at all. Some deities, Pharasma and Gosray, don't allow you to be sanctified either way. However, it says here that, as an exception, if you could follow a certain champion cause before the remaster, you can still choose that cause for that specific deity. I imagine this is only a stopgap measure until the Player Core 2 comes out, because I can see this leading to confusion. There's this hidden option that you'll only know you have if you have access to the previous edition. Now, there's a little something confusing here. It says you can choose to sanctify as holy or unholy only if your deity allows that. So sanctification is presented as an option. That's my understanding. However, it says you have the tenets of good and you gain the holy trait. What's confusing to me is that I thought sanctification was optional, but here it looks like all champions who are on quote-unquote the good side gain the holy trait. So I'm a little unclear on whether you must follow either the tenets of good or tenets of evil, or whether this is only if you choose to sanctify. It says you can choose the tenets of good only if your deity allows you to be sanctified as holy. So I am taking those to be the same thing. Choosing the tenets of good is like the choice of sanctifying. This is a quick response video, so maybe someone in the comments will be able to explain this more clearly than me. I'll put it in a pinned comment if I come to understand it better. If you choose the tenets of good and are holy, you can choose any of the 3 current causes, and therefore any of their champions' reactions. So it's nice to be free to choose the reaction you want based on mechanical reasons and how you want it to gel with your party, separate from the moral code of your character. All right, now I feel like following the tenets of good and sanctifying and being holy are now pretty much mandatory if you're not evil, because it says to get one of the three causes, you must follow the tenets of good. So it is for all practical purposes mandatory to sanctify. But here's the buff. You gain the holy trait and add that trait to any strikes you make. Every single strike you make is holy and in the name of your god. It's like having a low-key smite evil from 1st edition Pathfinder on all the time, anytime you deal with fiends or other unholy creatures that likely will have a weakness to holy damage. Another buff is seen through this class feature, the Divine Smite class feature, the buff to your champion's reaction at level 9. It used to give you persistent good damage, but now it gives you persistent spirit damage. If you've seen my video on getting rid of alignment, you'll know that nearly everything can be damaged by spirit damage, even apparently mindless undead. And this same change is kind of throughout the remaster, changing alignment damage to spirit damage, which affects the vast majority of creatures, and which might have the holy or unholy trait to have an additional effect. Similarly, we'll see language that says this only works against evil creatures to this only works against creatures that are not holy, also greatly broadening whom you can affect. Okay, next is kind of a controversial one that I was surprised to see. I was under the belief that people could use the old versions of spells from the core rulebook that have not been superseded by new versions in the remaster if the remaster prints it with the same name, because that's how Pathfinder Organized Play will approach it. However, we have a section here that is called Pathfinder Core Rulebook Errata Remastered Compatibility. Errata suggests this supersedes what's on the written page, and Remastered Compatibility suggests you can use this if you want to, if you're using the remaster rules. So I'm unclear on whether the following thing we're going to look at is mandatory or not. It would seem to be the intention of Paizo that we use this upcoming language if we are going by remaster rules at our table, which is probably going to be the vast majority of tables now. So here it is. The Produce Flame cantrip, which added your spellcasting ability modifier to damage and has its spiritual successor with Ignition, which replaced it with an additional D4. They have now retconned it to no longer add your spellcasting ability modifier and to work like the current Ignition. I can see another conflagration around this right now, unless Paizo clarifies their intention here, because right now this and every other Ray of Frost cantrip also does the same. A lot of these spells that added your spellcasting ability modifier has now been replaced with a variable die. And this kind of happens throughout. We see a lot of things that are errated in not just this, but other rule books that replace the spellcasting ability modifier with a variable die. And it's presented as errata, which my understanding is it replaces the old text. Now, of course, they're not going to send the Pinkertons to our door to demand that we use the remaster rules only. We can continue to use the old versions of these spells. However, for them to have an official errata might reignite the controversy again. We will see. So here's an example of how they brought in the effect of some alignment abilities. This one affects one evil creature. Litany Against Sloth, instead of affecting one evil creature, affects one creature that isn't holy. So yes, by removing alignment, they're making these effects more broadly applicable. Similarly, the Monk's Keystrike focus spell, which before allowed you the option to do lawful damage, now allows you to do spirit damage. Then we have errata to make other books that we have compatible with the remaster. And for the Dark Archive book, they had to publish some things for the Psychic, which has, if you recall, souped up versions of cantrips, longer ranges, more flexibility, and additionally, the ability to amp those cantrips for an even better version of that cantrip. But some of those cantrips were core rulebook cantrips. Oscillating Wave, for example, had Produce Flame. So they wanted to give us rules, alternative cantrips that are from the remaster instead, that we can have souped up versions of and amped versions of. And here they do make clear their intention that it is optional. It says, if you wish to use the remastered cantrips instead of those from the core rulebook, these are some tweaks to some of the psychic conscious minds. And people are probably curious about this. The new ignition spell seemed to make the psychic's boost of produce flame redundant because it does greater damage on a melee attack. Well, here they made clear that it does more damage on a melee attack more. The souped up version now has a longer range. The melee version increases your reach by 5 feet. When you amp it, it does d10 damage dice at range and d12s in melee. One thing I was kind of unhappy to see was that there was no, the change to getting focus points back in the remaster that now lets any class restore up to 3 focus points between combats kind of stole the fire of the psychic, which before the remaster was the only one that could innately restore 2 focus points instead of just 1 between combats. I was wondering if there's going to be some commensurate boost to the psychic, some better way it can use its focus spells, and I don't see that here. So that's a thing, or lack of thing. Also, I thought this was cool. The Tangible Dream Conscious Mind has, instead of Dancing Lights, has the new Figment Illusion spell. So they get cool things to do with that. Also, we have more changes to spells, removing the spellcasting ability modifier with a variable die that is presented not as an option, but as errata. And personally, I'm not sure why these are, unless there's something I don't understand, I'm not sure why versions of these spells that add the ability modifier cannot live harmoniously with remaster spells. Why can't we let the player choose which version they want to use? My guess is they're thinking of how it might interact with some other rule. Like, for example, if there's an effect that says you can cast this spell but increase the damage dice by 1 step. But I'm not aware of something like that. If there is, that would be useful to know. Please leave a comment. For Secrets of Magic, the book that has the Magus class, a lot of people were wondering how this would affect Arcade. Arcade Cascade. That's a cool name. But they mean Arcane Cascade. Because the traditional 8 D&D magical schools are removed, how do we now figure the type of the additional damage that you get from Arcade Cascade? Well, it's now like the wizard's new Bespell Strike feat that we saw in my wizard video. It's just force damage, with the one exception that if the underlying spell that allows you to enter the stance did a damage type, then your additional damage is that damage type. So much simpler to run and play. I like that. Of course, if it's more than 1 damage type, you get a choice. We get similar changes to spells, removing the spellcasting ability modifier, and then we get errata for the advanced player's guide. Here we had the evil champions. We have a mirror of all of the text we got for the holy champions. Also, if you have the tenets of evil, you gain the unholy trait, and all strikes you make have the unholy trait. And that's what most of the APG errata is. They did change 1 feat that I thought was funny. Since good currently is a not very good feat, you can only detect good if the aura of good is powerful or overwhelming. So that meant in the vast majority of cases that a creature had to be level 16 or higher, or an effect had to be rank 8 or higher. If they were a divine cleric or other similar being, it was an 11th level creature or higher. Well, now it doesn't matter. You sense holy creatures and their saccharine self-righteousness like smell, no matter what level they are. It doesn't matter how strong their smell is, you can smell it. They're able to buff it this way because holy creatures are now much rarer than good aligned creatures. So that was nice to see. So on the death and dying rules, the main argument I saw for the death and dying, the more, let's call it the more brutal version, was that it could make combat more exciting and more tactical because there's more danger of death. However, I think that it doesn't necessarily make combat more tactical. It definitely makes it more deadly, but the tactics to counter the more brutal death and dying rule of adding your wounded value every time your dying value increased was to bank a hero point, and which was a meta currency. It doesn't really exist in the fiction. It's something you do outside the game. And it meant that banking that hero point was kind of a more automatic choice. I think that a more tactically interesting game is going to make a variety of choices more viable. And also, if an ally is at dying 1 and there are area effects in play in a battle, you actually put them at more risk counterintuitively if you stabilize them. I just thought it created these kind of meta considerations that don't cohere with things in the fiction. And abilities that prevent you from being knocked out. that keep you on your feet but give you the wounded condition can actually put you in more danger. It led to perverse results. So I'm happy they went this route in the end. It's what the majority of players wanted, and people who want the more deadly, brutal variant should feel free to apply that house rule at their tables. So that's it. That's continues my coverage of the remaster. I actually have one short video to publish. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Also, as you can see, I try to do things in a timely fashion when news breaks, so ring the bell for notifications of future videos. Also, if you haven't yet, join my growing Discord community where people talk Pathfinder 2e and other gaming, and play Pathfinder 2e in our drop-in organized play system called Endless Tale Tavern, and support my Patreon. I am a lawyer, but I don't do legal work that pays, the kind of law I do. This allows me to continue my channel. You'll also get access to exclusive videos, including me going through my preview copies of the remaster books, and also Rage of Elements with members on my Discord. And tier 2 supporters and above can watch me running Pathfinder for D&D YouTubers. So that's it. I have been Ronald the Rules Lawyer. I'll see you next time.